Okay, it is actually 9:02 p.m. Central Standard Time. We got a little late start due to some technical issues with my system here. I mean, nothing was working, television, internet, or none of that. So, all you guys can hear me. Type in the chat box. Okay. All right. Can you hear me, Mackenzie? Type yes in the chat box if you can. Okay. All right. So let's get going. I'm going to share my screen. All righty. I hate this when this happens. Very irritating. All right. So let's get to the student preview mode. All right. So as as I show you every week, and by the way, just today, for you to know, today is Monday. No, it's not. My calendar is off too. Help me. The 26th of May, Wednesday, the 26th of May. All right. So again, as I said, it's about 9:03 p.m. and this is the emails that I have sent out to each of you. By the way, you each should have a copy of this Senate bill 3023, which deals with deflection. We'll refer to that. And then you should have the PowerPoints from week 3 as well. Okay. So let's look at the assignments for this week. Right. So your discussion topic for this week will be enforcement or treatment. Enforcement or treatment. And so you're going to determine whether enforcement, and we're going to talk about the war on drugs, or treatment and rehabilitation is the best approach for reducing drug-related crime. Just for your information, um, my personal position is that um, the war on drugs is a loss. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And that the best way for us to battle drug use is to take away the customers. And if we to take away the customers, we have to deal with treatment and rehabilitation. I have said many times that there's a correlation between drugs and crime, and that locking up people for periods of time does not help them. It's just like a person who's sick and they're not being treated. The time just goes on and on and on, but they need to be treated and brought back to a point where they can get in a new direction. And in order to get people to 6 o'clock on my clock system, you guys are all should be familiar with that. The 6 o'clock time, the 180 degrees from 12 o'clock. You remember that? Remember that? Yeah. To do that, um, okay, well, the way that I refresh your memory is that if you look at the clock at 12 o'clock, you start at 12, and a circle is 360 degrees. But I don't want you to go 360. I want you to go 180. And so I use the clock at 12 o'clock is where you start out. Then you go to 1 o'clock, which is getting better. 2 o'clock. 3 o'clock, you're halfway home. But the problem with 3 o'clock is that you can still see 12 o'clock, and then you can see 6 o'clock where you need to be going. So there's more of a tendency to go back to 12 o'clock where you started out with your problems, or as we might say, backslide or get back into that old habit. But then you begin to move more. And remember, this all occurs with treatment and eventually rehabilitation. So then you move to 4 o'clock on the clock, and then 5 o'clock. Well, by the time you get to 6 o'clock, that's 180 degrees. And that's the halfway point. That's where I want you to be, because of the fact when you're in 180 degrees, then you have a tendency to be in a position where you cannot see where you came from. But you don't want to go any further than 180 degrees, because as you know already, it'll take you back all the way around, all the way up to 9, and then back to where you started. So you'll be back in the same slippery slope. And people do go in 360 degrees, but I don't want you to go I don't want a person to go in 360. I want them to go in 180. So that if they're at 6 o'clock, they're at that 180, and then they continue from that point to stay on that and grow there like a freshly planted plant, and you get your root there and you grow stronger and stronger, and you begin to move forward. So what does that is the treatment that you need for drugs or alcohol, combined with whatever else is needed, such as the things we've talked about before, dealing with helping individuals to get education. Education is a big one. Vocational skills, and things of that nature. So basically what you've done to reduce the crime is you work towards rehabilitation, or as you take the short version of it, rehab something. And everybody's familiar with rehabbing. So that's what you'll do with a person. So that's my 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock thing that I referred to earlier in the course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very, 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 very important. So, all right. So for your initial post, you're going to read this article, Optical Dynamic Allocation of Treatment and Enforcement in Illicit Drug Control. And for your initial post, you're going to select either enforcement or treatment and rehabilitation. Now, don't everybody, just because I said what I said, go and pick it, because as you already know, your initial post was due yesterday, and that your reply post will be due Saturday. So if you got your initial post in on time, it should have been yesterday before this lecture even took place. All right. So and then it says, if you selected enforcement, explain why we need to continue enforcement and the war on drugs. Give your rationale and reasons for it. 2, if you selected treatment, explain why we need to focus on treatment and rehabilitation. Defend your selection as the best approach for controlling drug-related crime. Describe the pros and cons of each of your selections. I'm not going to go into those in detail because you're going to do that yourselves. And then for your reply post, which is due Saturday, select a peer's post with do you agree or disagree with their post, and add any additional pro or con to their approach. And that's what I want you to do, and that will get it done. All right. So provide something to support your positions. All right. So that's the discussion assignment for the week. All right. So now let's talk about the assignment, written assignment. Okay. So view assessment. Let's go into it again. So you're going to again use the scenario. Remember, Famous Dave. I went to Famous Dave's today for lunch, so I guess that's kind of like stuck with me right now. But Famous Dave to us is Dave from week 1 and his life circumstances. So remember, you're going to use that as a backdrop for all of your written assignments, okay? And that You should have that on your desktop by now. So for this assignment, you'll need to address these issues that are stated in each bullet point. Describe the connection between mental health and the self-medication phenomenon. Identify how this connection impacted Dave. Now, pay attention. Summarize the risk factors for criminal behavior due to substance abuse and mental illness. And then finally, identify, Dave's risk factors. Explain the relationship between substance abuse and criminal behavior. Identify that in Dave's scenario. I give you a lot of information about that because, like I said again, as somebody said, you're a one-sided professor. Well, I do it based on my experience down through the years, starting practicing criminal defense as a lawyer in 1978, having been a paralegal, having been a police officer, an investigator, have worked with many individuals dealing with drug as dealers and as users, and then just basically recognizing the fact that people commit crime to support their drug habits, period. These are good people. And then you're going to discover how people got caught in the opium crisis as we come into that very shortly. We'll talk about that as well. So then finally, explain the relationship between, as I said, identify the relationship. So don't pay attention to this statement. Hear me. It says in here, provide at least one credible source. Now, those who do not listen to this lecture will do that. And you will not get exemplary. You might get, you won't get the worst level, which I'll show you in a few minutes, but you will get closer to it. You might get competent or proficient, but you won't get exemplary. Remember I told you, I want everybody to aim for exemplary. So here's the point. Remember what credible sources are. Credible sources are another way of saying APA citations. Remember, citations in the body of your papers support your statements. Very important. And you should have a reference page, and they should match. Very, very, very important before I get to the rubric. And like I said, if it says at least one credible source as an APA formatted reference, it's awkward how they wrote this. The APA credible source is actually a citation. And then you do have a formatted reference for a reference page. All right. And it should be how many pages? How many pages should this be? A minimum. Yep, exactly. And that you shouldn't even have that question mark there because it says 2 to 3 page paper. You can go beyond. I don't penalize students for going beyond, but I do run every paper through Grammarly, and I would recommend you do and check the plagiarism box, because if you get beyond 25%, then I deduct 25% of the points from your grade right off the bat, and I'll override what it says in the rubric, and you'll end up with that lower grade. So it's very important. But remember, if you don't have a credible source, you'll get half the grade, which is basically failing. All right. So now let's, I think I'm going to have to show you the rubric. Yeah, I'll show you the rubric on when I get to the other part of this. Does anybody have any questions about this assignment? Remember, as I said before, there's a correlation between drugs and crime. Well, guess what? Mental health fits into that formula as well, And unfortunately, the sad part about it, good people, is that there are people who are trapped in using drugs and they had mental health issues. Some of the mental health issues were brought about from using drugs. But the key thing is you got to make sure that you cover those issues there. So what are the two most dangerous things to society, in my opinion, is mental health and drugs, which aggravate a situation. And I can tell you that as a lawyer, many of the individuals that I worked with, we went to drug court. And when we went to drug court, one of the things that we recognize for individuals, and I'm not talking about sellers, I'm not talking about them, but then there are sellers who are users. However, usually there's a big difference between the two. And so when you find yourself in a situation where you are a victim, where you started dealing drugs to support your habit, then I consider you still to be a user, because otherwise you wouldn't be doing that. You're not a bad person. You're not setting out to do anything bad, and you don't really want to hurt anybody, but you're just trying to make sure that you satisfy those requirements. Word document must be a Word. Do not submit it any other way. Okay. And remember, it says credible sources are 8% of total grade. However, be aware that if you look at this, look at what it says in mastery for the mental health and self-medication. I thought I'll just show you now. Exemplary description of the connection between mental health and self-medication with thorough details on how this impacted Dave. How do you give thorough details? Give me some sources to support your position. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay. And then notice what it says. Proficiency. Accurate description of the connection between mental health and self-medication of phenomena with details on how this connection impacted Dave. Remember, you gotta use that scenario. Students have, some of them submitted papers, did not do it, and didn't do well. The competence aspects of it. Look what it says. With minimal details of how it impacted Dave. Emerging means that you just left the information out and it's not clear. Look at the same thing with the risk factors. Same thing. You go through and you see it. Okay, same thing. Same thing with substance abuse and criminal behavior, which you should be a master on that because we talk about that a whole lot during the lectures. All the way down to emerging. One student said, if I don't give credible sources and I give the good information before that, then why do I still get emerging for the sections? And the reason is because of the fact that it doesn't really adequately deal with the explanation, unless your explanation shouldn't just be a statement. It should be something to support it. Get into the habit of not only making a statement, but being able to support your statement with some credible information. That's what I do as a lawyer. That's what I do as a professor and teacher with my students. Get you into that habit. It will cause you to excel. And then, of course, credible resources as well, coming down here. If you have one, then and it's correct, I'll give you the 4. So you'll get those points. But that's not really all that great considering. And then finally, make sure that you satisfy the 2 to 3 page requirement. If you don't read it all the way down, then you'll see emerging, professional language not used or did not meet the requirement. And so it didn't, in other words, there's nothing to support your statement. So I guess that's kind of like saying to you, I've given you the rubric. You want to get 50 points rather than 25 points. All right. Any questions about this assignment? Okay. I always do this because I see the papers from week 1, and I'm in the process of doing week 2 papers, which will be due by the end of Friday. And you'll see when you get your comment, read my comments. I put comments in the grade book and tell you why you didn't do well. If you did well, I'll say you did a good job, and I'll tell you why, or I'll just say excellent paper, you know. Okay, let me get to that. I think I saw what you said. I noticed keywords for this assignment are, yeah, and see, but here's the point. In order to you can't just read, yeah, those are key words, but you got to remember, you got to make sure that you understand the overall context of what you're doing. Here's what you're doing. You're preparing a written assignment to someone who doesn't know anything about this and could pick it up and read it and gather information. So uh, you can be too brief and don't have enough information. So it's worthless to a person who's read it. Does that make sense to you? Okay. All right. See, we have a lot of students that will do that. They'll say, "Oh yeah, but the word I saw the word summarize," and I says, "Okay, can't you summarize and still provide adequate information and sources to support your statements in a fashion?" Yes, the answer is yes, you can. So, all right. Any other questions? All right. I keep doing this every week because I see how papers are graded. Because I had one student that said to me that, oh, in the week 1s that I had graded, oh, I cited my sources. I says, no, you didn't. You put it references, and that's not adequate. That's not adequate. Cite sources support your statements that you have in your paper. Let's go back to student preview before I do that. Okay. And let's go. There we go. I want to get out of that. Okay, I want to get out of it. There we go. I don't want to do that. Let's do that. There we go. Now it takes me back. Okay, so then your quiz. I'm not going to talk to you about that. You already know the drill for the quiz by now. I've said it over and over. I cannot click on it. You don't have to ask me how many questions. They're all equally the same. And I do recommend that you take the quiz near the end of the week after you've had a chance to review the materials as well. And then your live classroom uh, phrase, which I'll give you a word before the end of this night is due. So notice these 3 things are due Sunday. The reply post is due. See, a lot of people make a mistake. They look at this and they say, yeah, but it says your discussion is due Saturday. That's a presumption that you don't understand the way that this system is set up, which I don't like it. Most of us professors have raised the issue with Ultra that they, instead of the initial post being the initial due date, which would be the 25th, it should be that, and then the 29th would be the reply post. But what they do is they put that in there. However, that's why the next thing that I'm going to do is very, very, very important. And here it is. I go to my calendar, and I hope that by now, those of you, there's only a couple people who've had the situation where they were in different time zones, Eastern time zones, and they didn't have the time. Remember, your calendar should look just like mine. It should look just like it, unless you've added some additional things to your calendar. But the basic stuff, this is where we are now, because this is when we started week 1. This is when we did week 2 last week, and now we're in week 3. After we finish this week, we will be starting the second half of the course. Here's an announcement I want to make. Anyone who has not submitted assignments for week 1, which, by the way, if you do, unless you have extenuating circumstances, you're going to have a problem. And you really should let me know about those extenuating circumstances during earlier period. But after week 3, I will not accept assignments. So like, for example, what some students try to do is after near the end of the course, they try to submit 1, 2, or 3. No deal. I'm not going to do it. It's going to be a 0 again. And even if you have extenuating circumstances for 1 to 3, I give you time to get those done. At the end of that time, if they're not done, then all bets are off. So it's very, very, very important. Why do you do that, Professor? Because I don't want people cramming, because cramming does you a disservice. I don't want to do you a disservice. I want to give you good habits so that you contemporaneously keep up. And I know there are issues that happen. I get messages from students, and I work with them on that. But I got to know. If I don't know, I don't know. So anyway, this is where we are right now, the live lecture. This is the reply post. By the way, just notice that it says here initial post. That's why the calendar is important, because it said what I said. Told you saw 29th on this other assignment page. It's the 25th for initial and the 29th for reply. And then the 30th for your assignments that I went over. Okay. All right. And then we're in week 4. So here's the deal. Maybe I misstated earlier, but I'll say it again. Weeks 1 to 3 that are not submitted by the end of week 4. When is the end of week 4? It's in June. It is June 6th, the first Sunday in June. All right. And week 4's assignments are due, because this will be week 5 that we're starting here. And then the final week of the course. See how quickly this thing moves? Bam, bam, bam. And so the course ends on the 18th again. Make no mistake about it. And remember, it's based on CST, Central Standard Time. All right. So that's important for you to pay attention. But if you have a problem with your calendar, and I've already directed a few people, contact personal support, and they can help you out there. They've helped out a couple students there. All right, so that's your calendar. All right, so now let's get into the announcements. Again, let's move this out of the way. So here's the week 3 announcement. And again, all your announcements are available. You have them in an archive setup, but you can still get them. So it says, in this week, policy and social trends dealing with mental health and criminal behavior. And it's important that you read chapters 3 and 4 of Drugs, Crime, and Justice, which I sent you the PowerPoints already. And then the following information here, as well as those chapters, these 4 items that are listed, very important to help you before you start your assignments. By the way, remember to do research when you do your papers. because you don't want to just cite the sources from the module, and you don't want to heavily lean on them. You're learning how to read the information that is generated in the module, including the textbook and PowerPoints, but you also want to focus on sources that you discover from using our library and learning center, which has some awesome resources to cover all topics. So we deal with the activities, mental health and risk factors for substance abuse and addiction, enforcement policies on drugs and crime. We've already started doing that, but we're going to keep going on it. Influence of social trends and knowledge check. That's something that you can do. The lecture course is today, 8:30, but you know we started late because of technical problems. And then there's the link there. And the discussion assignment, we already covered that. We also covered the written assignment and the quiz. And then my motto, adversity is springboard to success. You know where that comes from. It's right here in your announcements, which again, take some time to listen to it, and you'll learn a lot about me. Okay, you do yourself a disservice if you don't listen to this, because then you understand the context of where I'm coming from in terms of this. All right, so that's the announcement. And then, of course, just to refresh your memory, if you needed to reach me, you should already have my information. In the, you can use the course tools, and you can go over to the syllabus. By the way, it tells you, you can't see it. If you wanted to have a problem with contacting PSC, please don't chat with them. Call them on the phone, because sometimes you have to share, they have to share your screen, and that helps you better. Trust me, I had a student that started that, and they saw the value in that once I pointed it out to them. Okay, so anyway, here's the information again that reminds you of my office hours. You can text me, call me any hour of the day except the 25th hour of the day, and there is the phone number right there. And then this is a reminder about the things that I've talked about before. So that's just reminding you where you can find that information. Okay. So now let's get into more detail into the module. We already covered that. We covered that, which, by the way, going back to this a minute. So here is the full rubric. So you'll see what I'm talking about earlier. You see what I meant about from mastery all the way through. So you can see that in the module itself. But in the gradebook, you also see it, but you see it in a different format. But it's the same thing. But if you want to see the full thing, that's where you do it. Okay? So everybody knows that. So again, the way you do it, just helping you again, is to very simply go back to, let's close this, close the settings. So if you go to the assignment in the module, then you'll be able to see this right here. All right. So moving right along. That up there. Quiz. Live classroom recording. Of course, this is how you get to the link to get here originally, but I will be clicking that out and putting in the recording after we finish. And then I will go from that point and then email the same to you too. But those of you who are here have an advantage because you get the key phrase. You can put it in the Dropbox right away, but you already know to get to the live classroom lecture assignment is that for 5 points, you just submit your answer and then you hit submit. You'll see that when you get ready to do that yourself. Okay, and 5 points come about by giving me the right phrase at the right time. So you can give it today, which is the best practice for people who are here to get that one thing out of the way. Okay, so now let's spend a little time talking about this, where we've already started talking about this. And this is actually where you can find some information about mental health and the risk factors for substance abuse. And here's what you're going to discover. What I've already talked about is that it is a definite problem for individuals who use drugs, and that is mental health. Just to read you what it says here. It says, in America, of all recorded mental health patients, 38% use alcohol, 44% use cocaine, and smoke cigarettes. And so what it does is it brings you down to the point to see how they overlap and combine here. So you have mental health, mental disorder, all right, which is a cognitive issue. The two or more disorders when you have comorbidity. So if you have mental health and substance abuse, which is a common practice, notice how they overlap. Okay, it's like having double jeopardy in your life, and you have two strikes that are against you starting at the beginning. Remember, the drugs aggravate the issue of mental health. And then these are some statistics. And so dealing with the mental health issue and self-medication, notice what it says, and I can't say it any better, but I've already pretty much said it, is that two parts. The stress and life problems experienced by a person from any form of mental illness can create an unbearable situation and feeling of hopelessness and emotional pain. And so that person begins to drift off and get further and further away. They are going to stay at 12 o'clock and not even make it to 6 o'clock. And oftentimes they will perish, such as I shared before. I have a sister who passed away in '94, overdosed on cocaine, but she had some mental health issues that she had to deal with because my mother, who was killed, if you listen to my story, you'll hear, in '63, she was just a little baby and never really knew her. And so she suffered from that, so she didn't even have a fair chance. And after that, she had many other issues that compounded that, and the way that she anesthetized the situation was turned into drugs. And that eventually was the cause of her death. And so the point of the matter is that I'm reading all this stuff. You can read through it. I just kind of like summarized it pretty much by what I just said a few minutes ago and earlier. Okay, those individuals that engage in self-medication are attempting to manage mental health symptoms and medication side effects to fill a void within themselves or maintain a mental balance and cope with their personal and social conflicts. That's what results in people getting hooked and dying on drugs and alcohol. There is some legality in many jurisdictions with marijuana, but marijuana, as it says here, makes a person feel socially comfortable to offset the feeling of depression. But some medication side effects can cause sluggish feelings. So cocaine or methamphetamine is used to stimulate the individual only to crash later. As I learned when I was in the police academy, when we dealt with cocaine as a drug, and crack particularly, a cheap high, which we've talked about in um, um, last week. The point of the matter is that what it does is that people get these highs, and then they get up to a euphoric level, and after that they want to duplicate that. So you never do. And so what they end up doing is increasing the amount, ultimately ending up in their death. And that's what happens with most people, and that's what happened with my baby sister. It says self-medication does little to eliminate mental health issues. Did you hear that? I said that earlier. To the contrary, coming down from the drug-induced feeling deepens the mental problems and create an up and mostly down cycle of emotions and stability. Drugs can trigger mental health symptoms, as I said that earlier, and some of those are paranoia, delusional, depression, not to mention when the individual is under the influence of drugs, they make poor decisions that lead to deviant behaviors and criminal complaints, i.e. going out and committing crimes to support their habits. Okay. Addiction risk factors. There are many that contribute to drug addiction, and we deal with the biological aspects, which have to do with the way that the body operates, their arrangement, how they were raised up, who their family is. Now, family members do not just have to be those who are related to you. Family also has to do with a drug culture. Some people should be aware of that. So that fits under the biological factors. And that's how you actually get introduced to it. Folks you'll be around. Come on, try this out. Take it. See how it works. Don't do it. It'll send you spiraling. The psychological aspects is people who do that actually often find themselves having what we call low self-esteem, and different things. Military people, PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. There are many individuals who began to use these drugs who went to the war and came back, and because of what they saw in the war, they come back and that becomes a way of life. Their environment, who they hang with, who they spend time with. Did you not know there are even individuals who will listen to certain songs to get high on, and they could even reach a stage where they are trying to move away from that habit, and they can hear that song, and that song is a trigger, and it sends them thinking about it, which is the first step. And then if they spend more time with that, they'll find themselves right back at 12, moving away from 6. And the way they do it, though, is you don't go backwards on the clock. You go from 6. So you go to 7. Then you go to 8. I'm sorry, 6. You end up from 6 to 9. That's the halfway point to danger, because you can see where you came from. And then you get back to 12. So you start it all over. And you're like that gerbil on the wheel that's never going to get off. Just keep going on and on. A merry-go-round doesn't end until you get off of the merry-go-round, or the cycle that you're on here. And so here are just some issues that dealing with a juvenile, and some of the issues that lead juveniles to drug use, and they fit the mode of what I was talking about earlier. Chaotic home environment, ineffective parenting, then it results in not getting good grades, parental issues, substance abuse themselves, those kinds of things. Poor social coping skills. Again, those are skills that I use. Again, my baby sister, she had all of that stacked up against her. So what's the remedy for that? The right side of this chart, which, as you see, it has to do with strong family bonds, parental engagement, and I'm not talking about those who are parents who's involved with substance abuse or have their own issues. Clear parental expectations, academic success, um, strong bonds with churches and communities. A lot of my work, because I'm a pastor, we deal with those kinds of issues. I don't just deal with the spiritual side. I deal with the whole person, the holistic side, the mind, body, and the soul, to help people to deal with various issues as well. And that's what should happen in your school, various community groups, YMCAs, and other organizations. Conventional norms about drugs and alcohol, education, knowledge. And then this is substance abuse and the juvenile justice system. So I'm going to skip over that. And so these are some references for sources. You can take a look at this PDF, which will just give you some more insight into the statistics and numbers. Just be aware that they're around you and happening. Okay, enforcement policies. Now, um, this was the whole thing. Prohibition ended. That when at one point it was illegal, um, before the 21st Amendment, that allowed alcohol to be sold. That's going back into the 20s. And then the history of drugs, cocaine became illegal in 1914. Marijuana was made illegal in 1937. Look at the direction that we're heading in. And you look at the clock, and not the clock, but the timeline. The 60s, unlawful use of marijuana coincided with the bohemian and jazz musician nature. So people got hired to music and stuff. The 60s, that's the era that I was in high school. I was 10 in 1960. To LSD, we had plays that dealt with that. A play called Hair. You had songs that glorified using mind-altering drugs. In the 70s, marijuana was made illegal again, uh, and it became a Schedule I drug along with heroin. In the 80s is when they started using this war on drugs, which I'm going to just briefly talk about, where the way that the response was to began to issue legislation or laws on the books dealing with mandatory sentencing for drug-related crimes. But what happened, unfortunately, is individuals who were users got the worst end of the deal. And the war on drugs was being lost because, and again, like any other company or business, if you take away the business for the company goes down. They lose profits. Do you think that if we got a large number of people um, rehabilitated from drugs and alcohol, that we'd have a better society? What do you think? Do you agree with that? Did everybody get the question? Oh, okay. The question that I said, do you agree that rehabilitation or from drugs and dealing with alcohol abuse would make us a better society and at the same time decrease crime as well? Okay. So anyway, mandatory sentencing has dramatically increased prison populations, which made the situation even worse So you start sending these people, and they they already were bad, but you send them to a worse situation. I always tell people that the length of time that a person spends in prison is equal to like going to school to get a degree. You can get a degree in criminology from being in prison. And I don't mean the actual educational aspects as we talk about it in the academic, but I'm talking about in the world of the hard knocks university, where the incarceration also exacerbates rather, the mental health issues. So it doesn't help the individual. And incidentally, for your information, don't be so naive to not be aware of this fact that drugs are readily available to individuals who are incarcerated. So anyway, look at it said here. It says, so the lock them up and throw away the key. For example, possession of a small amount of crack cocaine for personal use carried a mandatory sentence that would preclude parole or early release. So that's what I'm saying. So it didn't. That's why the war on drugs issue is the wrong approach. That's the old penalizing people as opposed to rehabilitating people. Then there was a shift of policy in the 90s and 2000s, shifting from the war on drugs to dealing with abuse and treatment for drug and mental health issues. Okay, and that's what this is all about. Okay, and you can go through and you can read that. Let me see that again. You're having kids color pictures and then someone dips them. Oh, hey, let me tell you, you're absolutely right, Jennifer. I talk about this, and I think I might have talked about this before. I know I talked about this in previous classes, that I had yeah, that's, well, how about this? Listen to this one. I had a client who was a corrections officer at the county jail, Cook County, one of the biggest counties in the state of Illinois. And he was bringing magazines into an individual. And they were not pornographic. They were, Newsweek or something, sports, something that was, seemed like it would help that individual. And so what would happen is that he would deliver the magazines to them and give it to them. Not to read, they would chew the pages, just like what Jennifer said. They would chew the pages, and then after it dried out and everything, and they would get high. So, oh yeah, yeah, that's absolutely correct. What you just said, and uh, people would they would think innocently of the pictures, but then once they got them inside, they would disappear from the wall because the person would chew them, and they would do just like gum. They would spit it out. They didn't swallow it. They would get the drugs out, and you know, well, you got to remember this. If you take corrections course, I teach that. I talk about the fact that in order to maintain control, the um, the person in charge of the facility, as well as correction officers, have to monitor what comes in to the facility for reasons like that. You know another way? Fruit. They'll take a needle and inject it into an apple, or orange, or banana, or something like that. So there's all kinds of things that you need to be aware of. That's why I just said a few minutes ago that drugs are readily available in prison. Okay. Yep. And it's not just the medical staff or the cleaning staff, it's the corrections officers themselves as well. So you'll be surprised. Like I said again, there's so many issues that are there. That is why it is so important for I don't know why she jumped in. That was Alexa. I don't know why she's jumped in my conversation. She's sitting by my desk. But anyway, the truth of the matter is yeah, that's a very serious problem. So, all right. And so then, the president, Obama, signs the Durbin Fair Sentencing Bill to reduce the sentencing. See, sentencing does not help people. Rehabilitation and treatment is what helps people. You can say that forever. Uh, Notice this. We have talked about the need to address the crack powder sentencing disparity far too long with the Fair Sentencing Act. Now the end of that. We finally addressed one of the greatest injustices in our war on drugs. Drug use is still a serious problem in America, we agree. And we need tough legislation to combat it. But in addition to being tough, our laws must be smart and fair. And that's what that law was all about. So the key thing was to help people to get help, uh, the things that they needed, the things that I've been advocating here. So you get a chance to, you can read this, and then here's a PDF in there as well. So again, moving towards that. So enforcement policies more toward rehabilitation. And the final section is to deal with punishment versus rehabilitation. I will not spend time on this because we've been talking about this since the beginning. We talked about drug courts. And this is some historical stuff that you can take time and you can look at, showing all the way from 1989 all the way, let's see, to 2017. It shows that drug courts have increased. Why did they increase? The reason they increase is because the people increased, the number of individuals. Okay. All right. That's all right. So when it goes all the way down, and you can see from when the drug course started. Notice this in '89, logistically, Miami, Florida. Remember, drugs imported down in Florida come up north, and not as many come from the north. And then they talked about the establishment of the various courts. And then finally, in 2017, look, we started to deal with the mental health issues as well. So, all right. So then finally, for your study, and go over this, study this. Um, and then, you'll be able to do this studying. Patients with schizophrenia tend to have high rates of what? What do you think? Do you think they have sleep disorders, alcohol and tobacco use, weight loss, caffeine use, sleep disorder? Want to try this one? Does that make sense? And the reason is because these are the things that stimulate that type of activity. That's what that's all about. So you could go over to the next one is, they talked about during the Obama administration, which pact was signed into law as relates to sentencing? The cocaine law, the heroin bill, the legalization of marijuana, or Fair Sentencing Act? Which one is it? I just talked about it. Yeah, there you go. So you can go over. Yes. So you can go over and study though. There's about three more after that. All right. So that's about it. Any questions about the assignments for the week or anything that I've said? Okay. Well, thank you for being so patient today, hanging in there, guys, with this technical issues that we had. So let's make sure that you get those assignments in. Um, I'm going to give you a key phrase. Anybody want to take a shot at what it might be? That's a good one, but that's not it. That's a very good guess. Jennifer said her brain hurts. Any more? Okay, I'll just tell you. Okay, I pointed to my head. Now, what do you think I meant? There you go. Rah, you bounce back. If I could do some of these things on here where, claps and stuff like that, I would do that on here for you. Mental health. That's the phrase. Give me that, guys, and you'll have your point. So again, I appreciate you guys hanging in there. Again, please, 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 whatever you do, pay close attention to what I've said about your written assignment and the importance of credible sources, not a source, because the key thing is you want to help people that read it, excuse me, to be able to do it and make sure it satisfies the requirements. Double space, not single spaced as well. Word, not PDF, not PowerPoints. Cover page and reference page, as you already know about that APA stuff. All right, guys, I'm going to say good night to you. See you next week. Uh, God willing, it'll be at 8:30 like we normally have, which should be good. So good night. Stay safe.